Yeah.
Hello, all that are joining. We're just going to wait a few more minutes for people to arrive.
No, no, we don't say anything. Julia is just like waiting. We are practicing a silent prayer before like
This is very suspicious. What is wrong with everybody?
The quietest of waiting periods. Yes,
yeah,
hopefully you can hear us loud and clear.
Good now.
that's
And we're
good,
just
yeah.
we're just waiting a few minutes for everyone to arrive, and then we'll get started.
But perhaps we can start like and then whoever joins, I mean.
Very good. Well, hello everyone. I'm David Gilbert, a researcher with the REAL project on degrowth here at ICTA-UAB, or the Autonomous University of Barcelona. And we appreciate you joining in on what our Reels seminar series, where we're touching on various aspects of degrowth and post growth studies, where we spend an hour on these topics. So today we have an hour, about half an hour to hear Angelos Varvarousis speak, and about half an hour of Q&A. And please let our speaker present and save your questions for the Q&A period, where you can raise your hand to ask your question directly, or you can put it in the chat, and I'm happy to read it for you. And this seminar, like all of Real's seminar series, is recorded and will be posted at ICTA's YouTube channel. Hopefully, we'll have a link for you in the chat for that. So today we have Dr. Angelos Varvarousis presenting. He is the senior Ramon and Cajal researcher here at ICTA, Autonomous University of Barcelona. He's also the director of our Masters on Degrowth, Ecology, Economics, and Policy program. And I can say truly one of the kindest and most generous colleagues I've ever been fortunate enough to have in my career, and author of many now leading articles and perspectives on degrowth, especially on its spatial aspects, also relating to work on the commons, liminality, many relevant topics to degrowth, many of which have been published in truly some of the top journal article outlets, and also book publishing houses of our field. So we're very fortunate to be welcoming Angelos here to this virtual forum, and I'll pass the microphone to him. Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much, David. I mean, I didn't expect such a warm and generous introduction, so thank you very, very much. I will go directly to the presentation and the topic. It's a little bit, I was thinking that perhaps it would be like a little bit of hybrid, but it isn't. So it's like, let's go directly to the more visual thing that perhaps will make things a little bit less boring. So can you, everyone, see in full screen the presentation? Okay, thank you. So this presentation is like a mixture of a recently accepted paper, not yet published, in the Journal of City Climate Policy and Economy, which is the official journal of the C40 cities. C40 is like a network of cities around the world that have committed in taking some action against climate crisis. I'm giving
It's okay, it's downstairs.
no,
It's online.
yeah, it's online. Sorry for this. So it's more interactive than I expected. And so, yes, this presentation is a little bit about to present this paper, but not only. My aim is a little bit to discuss with you some ideas that we are developing here at ICTA with colleagues from the real projects, but also outside ICTA and with other colleagues from all over the world on this broader topic of post-growth urban transitions, what it means, how should we think about it, and also what are some actionable things that we can do. So this journal is like very much focused on policy, as the very title says. And I think this was important. It was like an exercise that we took it very seriously. The paper was published with Yorgos Kallis and Maria Kaika. Maria Kaika is a professor at the University of Amsterdam and the director of the Urban Studies laboratory there. So we took it very seriously and we tried to bring together many abstract ideas and thoughts that we had before about how to move towards post-growth cities and put them in some actionable policies. So to start with, I mean, anyone can really understand and grasp it like intuitively, how transitioning to post-growth cities can be thought like in a multiplicity of ways. Like I remember when I first read about degrowth, it was like a Yorgos paper in 2010 or something, like criticizing a little bit a documentary about a person, the no impact man person that was trying to move like to post-growth, like on his own way, like as an individual. And then, of course, this thing has evolved over time. People have thought about doing it like in smaller communities that would practice degrowth in their everyday life and so far and so on. Nowadays, there is, and for good reasons, a very strong preference for the very big scales. Like the planet, so there is a lot of work that is being done like for degrowth at planetary scale with models and many other things. Of course, there are people in our and researchers that try to work about post-growth transitions at the national level, being inspired by the idea of national sovereignty and anti-colonial movements. Here in Spain, and especially in Catalonia, there is like a strong preference about the regional level, about the level of Catalonia. Many people here want like to become independent in order to fight for their right to self-determination. And obviously there is a discussion about how to do it at the city level, at the level of a city. One thing that we were thinking always, and that was like a very big challenge for us, the three of us who published this article, to think about this transition, is that we don't believe that it is possible or even feasible or even so useful at the end of the day to think about these scales as isolated from each other. So we tried to push for a way of thinking, for a way of planning for the growth that somehow will recognize the necessity for working in a multi-scalar, cross-scalar way and try to bring together these multiple layers and reference levels and also design some policies about this multiscalarity, which is the most difficult thing. Okay, you can think perhaps like in multiscalar ways, but how you create policies that operate in various scales simultaneously. So I will try to give like some more context before that, because it's true that now, like also Manuel Castells said it already like 50 years or 40 years ago, that we live like in an era that is called urban. And it is urban like in many different ways. It is urban because the majority of the global population lives in cities, but it is urban also because urban values and urban lifestyles are dominating the world. It is also urban because what happens in cities affects a lot what happens outside cities, and for many other reasons. And in this urban era, what's happening like in abundance is that there are so many plans on how to do climate transition and green transition policies, like from the very famous 15 mini cities that now are being adopted, but this is not obviously something new, like how to make cities sustainable was always like something central in the agenda, like even from Ebenezer Howard and before, like 120 years ago or more, where cities were framed as diseases, as the famous urban disease, like in the for the global, for the world, and like for the society, to very crazy ideas like Liam Young's super dense, super crazy plan of planetary city, a city that accommodates all the global population in one dense urban center and leaves the rest for the wilderness to thrive. And many ideas that we thought should be challenged from a post-growth perspective, because we don't think is the way to go. Is not they will not solve the problem, and I will explain why. One thing is certain now, that all cities grow, many of them become greener, many of them, the majority of them become denser, the majority of them also become more energy efficient, and all of them want to have a strategic plan about climate change, adaptation, and mitigation. This is certain. And despite this, CO2 emissions and other environmental damage is on the rise. So the idea is that I think obviously we are missing something. So, but what are we missing? I will try to answer this by juxtaposing two research projects. One research project I did with my colleague Miriam Best on the city of Zurich, and this paper with Yorgos Kallis and Maria Kalka that I will present right after. And I'm just opposing these papers because I feel that these ideas will better reveal the distinction between a post-growth strategy for cities and a green growth strategy for cities, which I believe are like two completely different pathways in a way, or largely differentiated pathways. So Zurich obviously like is a city in Switzerland, like quite rich, one of the richest countries in the world, and is considered to be a champion in its green transition plans. So it's a city that is relatively progressive, and it has been considered like a champion in drafting transition plans. And it is true here you can see like the plans that the city of Zurich has drafted like in the last 10 years or so. And what we did is that we did like a critical analysis of these documents for this paper. So we went through all these different plans and we tried to understand what are they promising and what are they trying to do. Before going to the main points that these plans want to do, is like try to think a little bit about what is the population of the city, what are the main industries in Zurich. And one can see financial services, creative industries, clean tech, ICT, tourism, life science. So basically, it's a city that cannot feed itself. It cannot provide for itself almost nothing but these services. And still is considered like the champion city in green transition policies. How it can be explained? If you see also a little bit the emissions per capita in Switzerland, for instance, you can see that in Switzerland, like the average consumption of emissions per capita is around 13 tons and 80% of it is consumption based. This is much larger than what happens like in Hungary, for instance, a country with a similar climate, to say so. So it cannot be explained through climate conditions or so far so on. What happens with India and what happens like with the global average. And it's also a city whose residents report like a very, very high, according to Eurobarometer, like subjective well-being. Is among the happiest cities in Europe. So by revising and reviewing these documents, we see that, like some points, of course, I'm leaving the rest for you to read the paper when it's officially out, but some points that I want to make here is that what these plans aim to do is first and mostly to ensure the city's continued growth and competitiveness as a global financial capital, small but globalized financial capital, is to ensure the continued well-being of the local population. And most importantly here is to reduce emissions produced within the city's territorial boundaries, which account, as we said before, around only the 20% of the total emissions to carbon neutrality. The way to do that thing is also like quite speculative in some ways. It is supposed to become through an urban growth plan based on densification, demolition, and reconstruction, meaning more cost shifting, more sustainability inside, but way more cost shifting outside. And also it's taking as granted like capture emission strategies and technologies that do not yet exist. This is like an archetypic like green transition plan. So in our paper, we tried to move towards different direction. So the three things that the three questions that we wanted to explore, of course, like to put them at the very front, is first, okay, we want to do post-growth city planning. But first, what is a city? What is urban growth? And when urban growth becomes a bad, becomes what Herman Daly has called uneconomic. So if we don't answer these questions, I think it's like a little bit problematic to think about policies and transition plans that want to deal with post-growth in a way. So obviously, cities are defined by things that we already know, like dense centers, like encounters, like big populations and many other standards. But what is the effect of this urbanization is way more profound and widespread than in the cities alone. So you can see like here very quickly different forms of impacts of urban growth that are not evident within the city, are evident way beyond the city. These plastic oceans of food, these landscapes of leisure, or like these high-tech centers. All these are impacts of the city growth, which are not evident inside the cities. So we wanted to make sure that our proposal takes into account these complex and more complicated relationships between what is a city and what is not a city. Second, what is urban growth? Then, of course, like urban growth is like a growth in population, is like a growth in GDP. Here we give like a tripartite definition of growth. First is like increasing the economic output of the city, typically measured by GDP or income, and strongly associated with resource use within and beyond the city. The second is spatial, horizontal or vertical growth, densification or urban expansion. And the third is population growth, permanent and visiting population. And when we are talking about urban growth, we understand that in many cases, these types of growth may coincide, but in other cases may not coincide, and may one be prevalent and like another absent. But in most of the cases, urban growth co-evolves with growth and financial growth and infrastructural growth. So this is what we should have like in mind, that we want to degrow or move beyond this. So what is an economic growth? An economic growth is a growth whose costs within and beyond the city's boundaries far exceeds its benefits. So here is like, we are opening like, this is like the short definition. Then of course, like we have here, like I'm copying here some extract from the paper, which says that obviously, as there is no such thing as a city at its universal form, an economic growth may be experienced differently in different cities across the world. But still, I think it's important to highlight that there is a certain level above which urban growth in its combined form, it's becoming uneconomic. And our definition of post-growth cities goes like cities that thrive without growth, serving their population needs equitably without exceeding their fair share of planetary boundaries and without shifting their costs to other places near and far. So this is what we want to achieve, which is like a different objective than the objectives set by the green growth plans I presented before for the city of Zurich. Okay, like now let's move to the more interesting and fleshy part, which is, okay, how to get there? And obviously, you will find my answers unsatisfactory, but still there are some answers that we tried to work like with a lot of passion amongst us. So here what we are doing is that we are setting a roadmap. The roadmap towards post-growth cities, and we call it like a roadmap because it's a combination of things. It's a combination of principles and policy recommendations. We have 3+1 fundamental principles. I said 3+1 because 3 are in the original article, and now I added 1 more for the presentation, and 7 policy recommendations and leverage points, areas in which small changes can create big change. And I mean, what is interesting is that we tried also to back, but I'm leaving it to you to read the article when it's out, all these policy recommendations and principles with concrete examples of cities that have implemented, at least partially, these measures. So we didn't include things that have never been implemented or proposed, at least, or tried. So the principles. Obviously, having said so much about like planetary thinking and like that city is not a city, but it's also like other parts, one fundamental principle is that post-growth cities planning requires a different type of thinking, a planetary scale thinking, an overall shift in how we understand and manage cities and their sociological, socio-ecological impact. So this is like the first. The second is a different understanding of how to measure and plan for urban sustainability, meaning that you cannot celebrate the reduction only of in-city CO2 emissions when at the same time your policy has shifted the cost tremendously to other parts of the world, inside and outside the countries. And this needs a different type of thinking, a multi-scalar thinking, as I said in the beginning, and trying to find like indicators and measures that consider metabolic dependencies, global supply chains, and equal global transfers, and so far and so on. The third principle is to pay attention to growth dependencies, and I think this is becoming increasingly relevant in an era in which cities, the role of the cities has changed. So cities are not like anymore the agglomerations that serve industrial production, but they have become, especially after the 70s, like what Harvey Molotz has said, like growth machines. They exist in order to produce growth. So if they exist in order to produce growth, in order to enhance growth, one should pay attention also to how public services, the well-being of the people, and many things very functional for the city depend upon growth. The fourth is to avoid what someone called like zombie policies, like these urban blueprints that are moving around and we know that they don't work. And despite knowing that they don't work, they still are being tried, tested. And 7 policy orientations that I will not expand so much, but I will give like some ideas in order to finish like in a couple of minutes or so. In the paper are backed with specific examples, as I said, but first is like tax vacant housing, because vacant housing is like a very underestimated driver of growth, because vacant housing first is created artificially through speculation to regulate rents and to have like properties readily available for reselling and reselling in very quick cycles. And in fact, because it is vacant, it creates like shortage, it drives urban growth. And there are many good cases and good examples of cities that have tried to minimize this thing. Guaranteed basic income, it may sound a little bit crazy that we put it at an urban level, and we acknowledge that cities cannot fully finance basic income or other schemes, but they can run pilots, then can define living wages that can push, obviously, first of all, at the public sector, that can push overall income up, and they can plan and push for min-max ratios that would have like an impact on the long run. I think this is like one of the core things to limit financial capital. There is so much institutional innovation nowadays about how to limit financial capital. Here we are offering like a few things like ban buy-to-let, limit absolute number of houses per entity, land banking programs that at a minimum percentage of social housing in every new development project, rent control, executables showing anti-displacement toolkits and policies, barriers in selling houses in short to buy to sell cycles, and many other things. The list is really big on how cities can do that. The fourth policy orientation is to socialize and universalize provisioning while shortening and controlling supply chains. From free public transport to decommodifying crucial urban assets, to decommodify critical urban infrastructures, and to increase accountability across supply chains by practically and actively shortening them. The fifth is to reallocate labor with more municipal green job guarantees, with municipal employment in vital care, with pay for rift interventions, rift and repair interventions that can counteract the damages of environmental breakdown, and supporting a healthy volunteer work, especially for people that are outside, like they're very productive period, like pensioners, other things to do community work. One thing that we believe is important, it's like counterintuitively, it's in itself a measure against urban growth, is like to unprofessionalize decision making, to create like the conditions for slow decision making. Not technocratic, not executive, not tokenistic, but binding forms, slow forms of civic participation that will make room for discussing, debating, and slowing down like this technocratic decision making that is actually one of the biggest drivers of urban growth. And obviously the seventh is to degrowth tourism, not because tourism affects every city in the world. Obviously, it affects like many of the cities in the Mediterranean and other parts of the world, but because tourism is very much linked to city branding, which affects every city in every part of the world. So here we are trying to put like a strategy about how to degrow tourism that goes beyond, obviously, only taxation, control, and gentrification of tourism, and tries to bring a radical stop of branding, promotion, fiscal subsidies and exemptions for tourism investments, all this that is like the rule nowadays. And to finish, we acknowledge that we try to bring different scales in this understanding of planning for post-growth cities. It's not perhaps the most successful thing, but we are trying to do that thing. There are limitations, but I think such changes are in the correct direction, and with simultaneous action in other scales, like combined action in various scales, can bring some, can make some impact in order to avoid what Rodriguez Pons has said that this century, unfortunately, is not a century marked by prosperity, but it is a century that divides places between those that matter and those that don't matter. And obviously, we don't want post-growth planning to strengthen this division. We want post-growth urban planning to undo, to unmake this unfair division. So this is all. Thank you very much.
Let's all give Angelos a round of applause virtually for the amazing talk about cities, degrowth, degrowth futures, and also very concrete ideas and policies to get us thinking. So please do, we have a little bit less than half an hour. Please do raise your hand if you'd like to comment directly or drop a question or comment into the chat. I'm happy to read it for you. It looks like we already have at least one hand up. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to our first question from Laura.
Yeah, thank you. It was very interesting. And I'm not a social scientist, so I'm not gonna use the right words, I'm sure. And I haven't really worked about cities in a while. But I was thinking it was interesting, this idea of the urban growth beyond what we could think the city is. But I don't know to what extent we can talk really about cities only, because cities are by them like the kind of the definition of the city is some kind of I'm sure that there are more definitions and that there are more like things that define a city, but it is an agglomeration of people and buildings that devote to specific functions, but they don't produce the physical inputs that they need for like food and other inputs. Like nowadays, as you have said already, there's no industry in many European cities. They are kind of empty of biophysical processes that are basic, that some like 30 years ago, they still could have some industry. But I mean, and the thing is that there's this definition of cities being empty of biophysical processes, but I don't know to what extent we can link them so much to the growth of greenhouses in Almeria or mining projects for anywhere, because I think I was thinking that this is more related to the fact that there are some goods or raw materials that we can only find in specific places, and this is part of the globalization, but not necessarily linked only to cities that are dependent of inputs. But for example, the greenhouses of Almeria are feeding the whole of Europe, and I could understand, I think, this more as an equal exchange phenomena. I don't think this is the right word, but for me, this could be more linked to the unequal exchange and also tourism in Greece. I'm sure that this is more due to Northern Europe tourists that people from Athens, that I'm sure that they will play a part, but I'm not sure to what extent we can make this like clear line. I don't know if you have some nuance to this or yeah, that was my comment, not a question.
So what's the idea? I'm replying directly, or we are collecting questions, or?
You know, it looks like we have two other hands up right now. So I would say if you're up for it, go ahead and respond directly to this. And if we start having a kind of lineup of questions, we can take a few together.
Okay, good. Thanks. Thanks, Laura. Yes, I think we usually tend to think about cities in specific, based on their forms, like, we understand like cities on their forms, and then we just think about these cities need some food, that they always needed some food, or they need some minerals, and they need some construction materials, as they always did. And so why to link, if I understood well, like all these terraforming processes that are happening around the world with cities? No, this is the question, more or less. But I think if we shift a little bit the focus and we think about cities not in terms of their attributes that define them, but in terms of urbanization, like all these things that actually form this urban age, then we will see like terraforming processes that are really, really, really connected to each other. So just like to give you some examples. Cities obviously were never producing food, at least like in big levels, like in their boundaries. But they were very much dependent on their adjacent areas for much of the food that is produced there, that is consumed there, which is not the case anymore. Now you see like that this as urbanization grows, and obviously grows like in a very rapid way, cities are losing their relationship with their adjacent hinterlands, let's say, to say so, or like countryside. And we have hinterlands. Of hinterlands, we have like, as urbanization grows, the more it grows, the more we need depeasantization dynamics, like countrysides that are not countrysides anymore, countrysides that are really operationalized in order to serve these huge agglomerations. And I think this is a dynamic that cannot be studied and examined like without setting like on this connection. So it's not like by accident that agriculture is becoming so intensive and like so inhuman. Not even insects live in Almeria anymore. It's not by accident. It's not by accident that mines are becoming deeper and deeper. It's not by accident that second houses and like these operationalized tourist landscapes are increasing alongside urbanization. So if these are not happening by coincidence and they are related, then like if we want to think about urban sustainability, you cannot avoid but bringing these connections into the forefront. This is like the main idea. So these terraforming processes are very much urbanization, the industrialization, the city as the growth machine, operationalization of landscape. All these things are phenomena that are weaved together. This is the idea.
Wonderful. Thank you for that thoughtful question and follow up to help us kind of deeper understand these connections that we're addressing today. So I have a question that I think the first hand was raised I saw early on from a group labeled The Fish. Maybe you could go ahead and introduce yourself with your name and please ask your question. Cheers.
Yeah, thank you so much, Angelos. This is Charles Stevenson. I really appreciate that you're focusing on Zurich. That's really exciting to me. And you said in your talk that the role of cities in the world system has evolved since the 1970s. And I was hoping you could say a little bit more about that. And I think this links to both what Lau was saying and the question that Bruno posted in the chat. But I'm wondering to what extent we should think about urbanization as an outcome of capitalist political economy and the evolving agrarian question in the 21st century? Thank you so much.
Yeah, okay, I will expand. I mean, it's perhaps like a follow-up question to the previous one, so I will expand a little bit more. Yes, I mean, there is urban historians are, when historicizing urbanization, they see many different phases. Obviously, from the ancient cities that were not very big in general, but there were some exceptions, even in Mesopotamia, cities that had reached several 100,000 people, as commercial centers mainly. In the past, to the commercial city of the medieval times as we know it, then obviously after the process of the original accumulation and then closure of the commons, this, and of course, the rise of capitalism, this has also led to the Industrial Revolution, to urbanization. So Industrial Revolution and urbanization went hand by hand. So it's not something that one can think of them as separate processes. This is completely unthinkable. And obviously, many of the cities that we know, not perhaps the very ancient, the medieval ones, but many cities that we know now to be big cities are the output of this industrialization process. And they were made practically to host the people who work in the industries. Also linked to the modernist city planning and many different things that we don't have so much time to untangle now, but I mean, there have been specific ideas, especially in Europe, about how cities grow. After the 70s, there is a specific term, which is the industrialization in the global north, Europe and the US, which leads to loss of jobs. And this leads also to cut spending. So public spending in cities is being decreasing by a lot after the 70s. So cities try to compensate for this loss, especially in the global north. And they are becoming what has been called growth machines, machines that are based on rent extraction, not on industries and taxes on these industries that afterwards are being redirected to the city. So cities are becoming the locus of speculation. It's becoming the locus of the economic expansion through rent extraction, through financialisation, through gentrification, through displacement, through zoning, through renewal, through many different things. This has changed the nature of cities, of course. And obviously, all the dynamics of the original accumulation are continuing mostly in the cities of the global south now, and they create urban expansion in this huge urban expansion, which is caused by the continuous character of accumulation by dispossession. Obviously, then touristification enters the picture, especially after 2008 and the global financial crisis, very related to the real estate sector, and so far and so on. So there are things that I don't know if I am providing some extra context.
Yeah, now we have a question in the chat from Bruno Gastal, who writes, thanking you for your wonderful talk and wondering if you could reflect a bit on the interconnections between urban struggle and maybe any associated policies on the one hand, and agrarian and other struggles for non-urban territories on the other, because one very important driver to cities' population growth is the dispossession of rural peoples, especially in the periphery.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, there was a talk sparked by a quest we had to provide policy guidelines to the 40 cities, which is somehow guided, not guiding the overall framework. But the important thing, what we are arguing in this logic is exactly what you said, Bruno, to bring together these various scales, to bring together these different struggles, and to try to reconnect these struggles and these partialities by avoiding this dualism as being like the urban struggle for the city and the rural struggle for the countryside, because these are phenomena that are, as I explained, I think in some detail before, are intrinsically connected. So there can be no urbanization without depeasantization. There can be no gentrification without changes, urban gentrification without changes in the suburbs, for instance, or like in the peri-urbanized areas. There can be, like, again, no anti-tourist struggle in the tourist areas without like being connected to rural struggles. So all these struggles obviously are connected. And the important thing for me is to stop this dualism that exists and persists in the degrowth literature, to go either rural or urban, and to try to think like these struggles as like, and to try to rethink and replant these connections in a fairer way, which is like the most difficult thing. How to create, I mean, I think with a great success, how to delink the global south from the global north, but I think this is the same thing that we should do about the rural and the urban, about the peri-urban and the rural, about the peri-urban and the urban, and among these different spatialities.
We're approaching about 5 minutes left, so I'd like to ask the two participants with their hands up to share their question and then allow Angelos to respond. Thanks. So first we have Nikos.
Hello, I'm Nikos, this is Nora. We're students from the Sustainability Master of the UAB. And we would like to ask, basically there was a book that was published some years ago, which is, its title is Pour en finir avec les grandes villes, from Guillaume Faburel, who is an urban planning professor in France. And he was stating that regarding the big cities, all the new amenities, all the new social movements in big cities are actually advertising the city. So what is happening is that the damage is already done in the city. It's already built up too much, and it has already expanded too much. So I would like to ask whether those policies that were mentioned, which were very, very great, by the way, very, very interesting, could go hand in hand with what Guillaume Faburel has stated in his book, that to depopulate the cities. He's stating that rural and countryside areas are too empty right now. So it would be better for city dwellers to stop living in the imperialistic city and maybe move to the other areas. He's basically proposing an inverse urbanization. So could you think that such inverse urbanization could go hand in hand with the policies that you already mentioned, or even if it makes sense?
Thank you, Nikos.
Thank you.
And now we'll take a question from Sarah.
Yeah, thanks everyone. Thanks so much, Angelos. I'll try to keep it short, but just as a reflection, I was wondering about the kind of political feasibility of the proposals that you bring, in the sense of that, as we know, many of them have been implemented in cities in kind of like a more disparate or non-connected manner. And this hasn't led to stopping the growth machine. And on the other hand, also what we see emerging now as a consensus about the new municipalist movement of the last 10, 15 years is that in few of the cities that had very left, very progressive governments through these years, did they manage to establish the necessary hegemony to be able to implement long-term changes. So I wonder if with all of these policy proposals it wouldn't be necessary to also have a reflection on how can these different proposals create desire for this new post-growth urban politics, because I guess otherwise it can just become policies that can exist alongside growth, even though they might make it more difficult for it to reproduce. Let's see if we have time to reflect on it, but just to bring this.
Thanks, Sarah. No, I will try to be short, like in the last 3 minutes. So the thing is, obviously, the question on the urbanization is very relevant. I mean, first of all, I hope that it already became clear in my talk that we should stop considering urbanization as a transfer of people from the countryside to the city alone. Urbanization is many more things. And I explained, I think, in much detail ago how urbanization goes hand in hand with terraforming processes everywhere, with depersonalization and other things. So it's a qualitative turn in our societies. So like speaking about urbanization should not be conflated with going back to the land only, which I believe is a good idea, obviously, but we should stop conflating. So I don't believe like in the dream of the absolute dense, big urban metropolis that will be ecological, and like going back to the rural is like a bad idea because rural population consumes more CO2 emissions and stuff. I mean, this is nonsense, and like in many cases also scientifically proved that they hide so many assumptions that are like very problematic in a way. But it's important also to not think about, like the solution as like going back to the land movement. I mean, this is also something important. We need like a different connection of space and place, and this implies many more transformations, many more changes than this simplistic logic of going to the urban or going back to the rural and so far and so on. So I believe that. And now I'm passing a little bit to the second question with Sarah, which of course is very difficult. But we believe that these policies, Sarah, give like a tone. I mean, this is like the idea that these policies give a tone that is not very much prevailing in the green growth strategies that are in abundance now. So this is what we believe. Towards the end of the article, we are also laying out a provisional co-evolutionary strategy about how specific changes in this direction at a particular scale can create fertile soil for other changes to take place, like in different scales and other scales in different territories, also in alignment with what we were saying before about bringing together different struggles and think of them as like a struggle against capitalism expansion which is territorialized through these different processes of urbanization, depersonalization, operationalization, and so forth and so on. So obviously, there are things that cities can do, and they can do right now. Like, for instance, slowing down decision-making can be, I mean, it's like something that can be done. And then I think it can harvest like in the long term, some good results if it is institutionalized. Or there are things, as we explain, like in much detail in the article, like decent wage in Baltimore that create, like, for instance, a very specific social dynamic in Baltimore, like when it was implemented, or like things that happened like in Amsterdam against land financialization and speculation that have created like very real and tangible effects immediately. But obviously, there is no multiscalarity without coevolution. So multiscalarity and coevolution go hand in hand. And I think this is only what I can say.
Fantastic. Well, I think those are two great questions for us to wrap up on. So let's offer Angelos a very warm round of applause yet again. Thank you for participation, everyone. Please do check back with us. Our next real lecture is April 29th, where Dylan Sullivan will be presenting on degrowth as well. Thanks very much, everyone. Feel free to contact Angelos, follow up with him, keeping the conversation going. Still lots more to be said, I think. And have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thanks, David. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Angelos. Nice work.